Hollywood's golden age glimmered with star power, but behind the glamour lay a web of deception. 22 actors from this era hid or altered their true ethnic origins to fit the studio mold, trading authenticity for opportunity. Their secret identities shaped careers, shattered reputations, and forced them to confront the cost of fame. Stay tuned as we uncover these hidden truths. Hit subscribe and ring the bell to dive into Hollywood's darkest secrets. Merle Oberon. At the height of the 1930s golden age, Merle Oberon dazzled on screen with her exotic beauty and poised British accent. Born Estelle Merle O'Brien Thompson in Bombay on February 19, 1911, she was the daughter of a mixed-race family. All of this hidden under a carefully constructed English persona. Studio executives in London and Hollywood insisted she erase any hint of Indian heritage, even going so far as to fabricate a Welsh birthplace and new birth date for press releases. For years, Oberon lived with a constant fear of exposure, so much so that she altered family photographs and refused to visit relatives in India. It wasn't until a 1970 biography by Charles Hyam that whispers of her true origins spread in tabloids. That revelation cast a bittersweet shadow on her legacy. Audiences felt betrayed, and Oberon herself admitted she regretted the lifelong secrecy. Yet while her career never fully recovered in prestige, she remained an icon of glamour. Her performances in The Private Life of Henry VIII and Wuthering Heights still celebrated. The betrayal of her own roots became a tragic subplot to a life lived in studio-forged fiction. Rita Hayworth. Born Margarita Carmen Cancino on October 17, 1918 in Brooklyn, Rita Hayworth sprang from a Spanish dancing family. Yet as she ascended MGM's ranks, studio boss Louis B. Mayer insisted she Americanize her image. Her dark locks were dyed auburn, her surname shortened, and press handouts erased any mention of her father's Andalusian origins. Hayworth's reinvention paid off. She became the love goddess, starring in Gilda and enthralling millions. But the lie cut deeper than cosmetic changes. Hayworth feared that her parents' immigrant status would derail her career, so she publicly insisted she was of purely American descent. The secret held until the late 1950s, when gossip columnists dug into her past. Tabloid exposés briefly tarnished her image, but by then she had already cemented her star power. The shockwaves forced Hayworth to confront her heritage in interviews, ultimately adding a layer of vulnerability that humanized her off-screen persona. Her struggle became as compelling as any on-screen performance. Anthony Quinn, Mexican-American actor. Anthony Quinn was born Antonio Rodolfo Quinn, Oaxaca, on April 21, 1915, in Chihuahua, Mexico. Eager to fit the mold of a mainstream leading man, Quinn initially downplayed his Mexican roots, adopting a simplified, anglicized name and emphasizing his New York and Los Angeles upbringing instead. When he clinched his first Academy Award for Viva Zapata, in 1952, the public still perceived him as a chameleon, equally at home playing Greeks, Native Americans, and Arabs, rather than a proud Mexican talent. It wasn't until interviews in the 1960s that Quinn openly embraced his heritage, speaking candidly about the prejudice he'd faced in early auditions. The revelation endeared him to a new generation of fans and Latin American audiences, though some Hollywood insiders admitted they felt misled. Professionally, the shift had little downside. Quinn's career soared, earning him a second Oscar for Lust for Life and a reputation as one of cinema's most versatile giants. His journey from concealment to cultural ambassador remains one of Hollywood's most inspiring redemptions. Cesar Romero. With his trademark mustache and debonair charm, Cesar Romero became Hollywood royalty in the 1930s. Born in New York City on February 15, 1907 to Cuban parents, Romero was fluent in Spanish and steeped in Latino culture. Yet early in his career, studios insisted he mask any trace of his Cuban heritage, coaching him to speak solely in accented English and avoid Spanish press. Romero even legally anglicized his name from Cesar Julio Romero to Cesar Julio Roberts for studio billing, an alteration quietly reversed once he'd proven his box office draw. In the 1940s, a gossip columnist uncovered his Cuban roots. Romero responded by hosting bilingual charity events, turning the exposure into a chance to celebrate his culture. Critics praised his graceful pivot, and Latino youth flocked to see him in films like The Gay Falcon. Despite a brief wave of skepticism from fans who felt deceived, Romero's career endured for decades, including a memorable turn as the Joker on the Batman TV series. His ability to reclaim and showcase his heritage became a blueprint for other actors of color seeking recognition. Ramon Novarro, Mexican matinee idol. Ramon Novarro arrived in Hollywood in the mid-1920s as a young extranjero with a resonant voice and classical features. Born José Ramón Gil Samaniego on February 6, 1899, in Durango, Mexico, he was quickly rebranded by MGM as purely American, trained to speak with a Midwestern drawl and downplay any accent. Studio publicity materials credited him as a Dallas banker's son, erasing all ties to Mexico. The polished veneer crumbled in the early 1930s when concert pianist Oscar Levant's gossip column named Novarro as the Mexican sensation, inspiring fan hysteria. Novarro's initially icy reaction softened as he began accepting high-profile roles that hinted at his background, such as his stunning turn in Mata Hari. Though his star dimmed during the transition to talkies, fans respected his frank embrace of his heritage. Today, Novarro is remembered as one of silent's greats whose personal story reflected Hollywood's uneasy relationship with ethnicity. Maria Montez. Maria Montez, born Maria Africa Gracia Vidal on June 6, 1912, in Barahona, Dominican Republic, lit up Technicolor adventures with exotic flair. When Universal Pictures signed her in the early 1940s, Monte was told to play American and drop any hint of Latin inflection in her voice. Press notes described her as, from nowhere in particular, a mystery woman, glossing over her Caribbean roots. Montez's secret unraveled only after a 1952 Paris interview revealed her Dominican birthplace. The revelation fueled tabloid headlines, some dismissing her as deceitful, others applauding her rise from humble beginnings. Tragically, her career peaked just before her untimely death in 1951. She never fully reclaimed her narrative on screen. Yet Montez's bold, glowing screen presence endured, inspiring later Latina stars to demand truth and authenticity in Hollywood. Her brief, brilliant life remains a testament to both the allure and the cost of fabricated identities. Dolores Del Rio. Before she became the embodiment of glamour in the 1920s, Hollywood Dolores Del Rio was Maria de los Dolores Asunsolo López Negrete, born on August 3, 1904, in Durango, Mexico. A scion of a wealthy ranching family, she arrived in Los Angeles in 1925, eager to pursue acting. However, studio executives feared American audiences wouldn't embrace a leading lady with an unmistakable Hispanic name and background. They urged her to simplify her name to Dolores Del Rio, downplay her noble Mexican heritage, and speak with a genteel, neutral accent. Press materials even concocted a California birthplace. On screen, Del Rio sparkled in silent films like Resurrection and Flying Down to Rio, but off-screen she lived in isolation from her cultural roots. To maintain the illusion, she avoided Spanish-speaking circles, coached herself to eliminate any trace of her accent, and destroyed childhood letters that bore Mexican vernacular. Her secret lingered until the late 1930s, when a Scandal magazine exposed her Mexican aristocracy and bilingual fluency. Far from tarnishing her reputation, the revelation transformed Del Rio into a cultural bridge. She returned to Mexico to star in its golden age cinema and became a champion for Latin American arts in Hollywood. Embracing her dual identity gave her work greater depth, from her luminous turn in Maria Candelaria to her later Hollywood roles. Del Rio's journey from concealment to pride not only enriched her legacy, but also paved the way for future generations of Latina actresses. Ramon Novarro. José Ramón Gil Samaniego, whom the world came to know as Ramon Novarro, was born on February 6, 1899, in Durango, Mexico. When MGM discovered his striking looks and magnetic screen presence after the success of Ben-Hur, A Tale of the Christ, executives feared American audiences would balk at his foreign origins. They instructed Novarro to adopt a Midwestern drawl and publicly claim Dallas as his birthplace. His Mexican accent was quietly erased by dialogue coaches. Studio press kits recast him as the son of a Texas banker, and any mentions of his family life in Mexico were scrubbed from the publicity machine. Navarro suffered the isolation of a double life. On set, he maintained an American veneer, while in private he longed for home, speaking Spanish only in whispers. His star ascended with roles in Scaramouche and the Barbarian, but the weight of deception grew heavier. In 1931, gossip columnist Walter Winchell hinted at Navarro's Mexican roots, and rumors swirled among fans. Navarro, ever the consummate professional, gently acknowledged his heritage in select interviews, but resisted fully unveiling the truth for fear of losing his carefully curated image. By the mid-1930s, as talkies matured and audiences demanded authenticity, Navarro slowly reclaimed his identity. He championed Mexican-themed productions and attended cultural events, reclaiming his birth name in personal correspondence and later credits. Though his Hollywood prominence waned, his transition from concealed exile to proud cultural figure secured his status as a pioneering Latino star, remembered not only for his silent-era triumphs, but also for the bravery it took to reveal his true self. Anna May Wong. Anna May Wong, born Wong Liu-tsung on January 3, 1905, in Los Angeles' Chinatown, faced a Hollywood hostile to non-white performers. As the first Chinese-American film star, she fought for leading roles in the 1920s, only to be relegated to exotica and stereotypes. MGM and Paramount pressured her to adopt an anglicized stage name, Anna May Wong, and to emphasize any Western heritage, no matter how tenuous, in press interviews. She was billed as a California beauty with a mysterious European ancestry, while her authentic background as the daughter of Chinese immigrant parents was downplayed to make her more palatable to white audiences. Wong's career soared overseas, where British and German film industries welcomed her talent. Upon returning to the U.S., she refused to perpetuate the fabricated narrative and insisted on authentic portrayals of Asian characters. This defiance cost her coveted roles. Marlene Dietrich secured the part of the Shanghai-born spy in Shanghai Express that many assumed would go to Wong. Fed up with studio doublespeak, Wong publicly embraced her heritage in 1938 interviews, decrying Hollywood's racism and advocating for accurate Asian representation. The revelation sparked both admiration and backlash. Some fans who had been unaware of her Chinese roots felt deceived, while others lauded her courage. Though frustrated by the slow pace of change, Wong's stance laid the groundwork for future generations of Asian American actors. Her legacy endures not just in her screen performances, like the groundbreaking Piccadilly, but in her unwavering commitment to authenticity, even at the cost of her own career. Leslie Caron. Leslie Caron, born on July 1, 1931, in Boulogne-sur-Seine, France, charmed Hollywood as the elegant ingenue in An American in Paris. To American fans, she was a Parisian discovery who spoke flawless English without a trace of accent, her French origins romanticized rather than scrutinized. In reality, Karen honed her English in secret sessions with dialect coaches hired by MGM, who also advised her to claim a New York birthplace when speaking to the press. This misdirection helped Karen land roles in Lily and Gigi, cementing her as a versatile star. Yet behind closed doors, she spoke French on the phone, wrote letters to her parents in French, and occasionally slipped into her native tongue on set, prompting quick retakes and reminders to stay American. The ruse unraveled in the mid-1950s when a fan magazine featured candid backstage photos of Caron greeting French journalists, complete with her accented farewells. Rather than shy away, Karen seized the moment to celebrate her heritage, giving interviews about her Parisian ballet training and family history. Her raw authenticity resonated with audiences who admired her artistry, from the pirouettes in the L-shaped room to her later dramatic turns in French cinema. While some studio execs grumbled about the broken image, Karen's star power only grew. She demonstrated that true talent transcends contrived origins, inspiring actors worldwide to embrace their roots rather than conceal them. John Garfield. Born Jacob Julius Garfinkel on March 4, 1913, in the tough streets of the Bronx, John Garfield embodied the gritty realism of 1940s film noir. Jewish by heritage, Garfield changed his name under pressure from studio heads who feared anti-Semitism would dampen his appeal. Early publicity described him as of no particular ethnicity, a broad label designed to make him a universal American figure. Studio biographies whitewashed his slum upbringing, replacing it with a narrative of Midwestern modest roots. Garfield's raw talent shown in The Postman Always Rings Twice and Force of Evil, performances so authentic that rumors swirled about his street upbringing. Fans believed he was a Brooklyn tough guy rather than the Polish-Jewish kid he truly was. Only after the actor publicly clashed with HUAC in the early 1950s did his Jewish identity come to light in mainstream press. The timing was explosive. America was gripped by fears of communism and xenophobia, and Garfield's frank revelations about his background and his vocal defense of civil liberties provoked both praise and scorn. Despite blacklisting and career setbacks, Garfield refused to revert to a fabricated persona. He returned to roles that highlighted his heritage, as in Body and Soul, where his character wrestles with moral code in a blue-collar world. His insistence on truth over safety cemented his reputation as an actor of integrity. Though he died tragically young at 39, Garfield's legacy endures as a testament to the power of authenticity in the face of studio artifice. Merle Oberon. While Merle Oberon was introduced in Part 1, her story bears a second, deeper look. Born Estelle Merle O'Brien Thompson in Bombay on February 19, 1911, she was the product of a secret interracial relationship between her Anglo-Irish mother and Indian father. After her mother's remarriage, Oberon moved to England, but Hollywood spotlighted her English Rose image and demanded she expunge any Indian heritage. Studio-crafted press releases claimed she was born in Pune, later shifted to Wales, and finally Sabden, Lancashire, deliberately shifting her identity to suit market preferences. Oberon's transformation involved more than paper. She underwent voice training to refine her accent, physically altered her features with makeup to appear more stereotypically European, and imposed strict rules on friends and staff about discussing her past. She even diverted inquiring relatives with plausible denials. Despite these measures, rumors persisted. In 1932, a British journalist obtained her birth certificate and began quietly shopping the story. Oberon's anxieties peaked in 1945 when United Press wire editors leaked proof of her Indian parentage. Overnight, audiences re-evaluated her roles in The Dark Angel and The Garden of Allah, finding new complexity in scenes now shaded by the knowledge of her concealed roots. Rather than retreat, Oberon embraced public discussion of racial identity in one of her final interviews, lamenting the prejudice that forced her into secrecy, but celebrating her heritage as intrinsic to her artistry. Though her later films drew smaller audiences, she earned respect as a pioneering woman of color who, despite immense pressure, eventually reclaimed the narrative of her life. Glenn Ford, born Gwilyn Samuel Newton. Ford on May 1, 1916, in Quebec, Canada. Glenn Ford was the son of Jewish parents who had emigrated from Ukraine. As he transitioned from Canadian ingenue to Hollywood leading man in the 1940s, studio bosses feared audiences would balk at his foreign origins and Jewish heritage. To smooth his marketability, they encouraged him to simplify his name to Glenn Ford, drop any mention of his family background, and project an all-American persona. Ford immersed himself in the role. Off-screen, he rarely spoke of his upbringing in Sainte-Christine d'Auvergne, instead fabricating tales of a small town in Oregon. He embraced archetypal cowboy and military roles in Gilda and The Big Heat, further cementing his all-American image. Yet the lie weighed on him. In private letters to friends, he lamented having to erase his roots, writing that he felt like a stranger in my own life. The facade crumbled in the late 1950s when a Hollywood columnist uncovered his birth certificate and began questioning his heritage in print. Ford weathered a brief storm of fan confusion and studio apprehension, but ultimately chose transparency. He publicly acknowledged his Jewish background in interviews, speaking fondly of his parents and early life in Canada. Audiences responded with empathy and respect. His box office draw remained strong, and he earned an Academy Award nomination for The Blackboard Jungle. Ford's journey from concealment to candor resonated deeply, showing that authenticity can endure where artifice fails. Kirk Douglas. Kirk Douglas, born Isser Danielovich on December 9, 1916, in Amsterdam, New York, was the son of Jewish immigrants from Belarus. When he broke into Hollywood in the late 1940s, studios worried that his Eastern European name and Jewish identity would alienate mainstream audiences. To avoid pigeonholing, he adopted the stage name Kirk Douglas, drawing on the name of his high school football coach, and kept his family background under wraps. On screen, Douglas epitomized rugged masculinity in films like Champion and Spartacus, roles that had little to do with his real-life heritage. Off-screen, he carefully erased Yiddish phrases from his speech and rarely spoke of his parents, portraying himself as a symbol of bold American individualism. His performance in Lust for Life earned him an Oscar nomination, but the personal cost of his fabricated identity tugged at him. He once confided to a friend that he felt unmoored from my own past. By the mid-1960s, Douglas had grown comfortable enough in his stardom to reclaim his Jewish roots publicly. In interviews, he spoke proudly of his upbringing, his Orthodox grandfather's influence, and the challenges his family faced. When he retold his life story in his 1988 autobiography, The Ragman's Son, he laid bare the truth. Fans embraced the revelation, celebrating him not just as a titan of cinema, but as a reminder that one's origins can become a source of strength rather than shame. Jeff Chandler. Jeff Chandler was born Ira Grossel on December 15, 1918, in Brooklyn, New York, to second-generation Jewish parents. When a Warner Brothers talent scout spotted his baritone voice and commanding presence, the studio insisted he adopt a more ambiguous name, Jeff Chandler, and downplay any reference to his Jewish roots, fearing anti-Semitic backlash. Chandler played everything from Native American chiefs in Broken Arrow to swashbuckling heroes in Sword of the Avenger, his heritage never questioned by audiences. Off-camera, he distanced himself from synagogue and Hebrew school, mastering a neutral accent and sidestepping Yiddish expressions. Yet the dissonance between his public persona and private identity gnawed at him. In letters to his sister, Chandler confided that he lamented having to burn bridges to his past. In 1954, when rumors of his true background leaked in a New York gossip column, Chandler chose openness over concealment. He granted interviews detailing his Jewish upbringing, tracing his family's journey from Eastern Europe to Brooklyn tenements. Though a few fans felt misled, the majority admired his honesty. Studios even began offering him roles that reflected his heritage, such as in The Juggler, where he played a Holocaust survivor. Chandler's embrace of his roots enriched his craft and set a precedent for actors seeking to balance authenticity with stardom. Gilbert Roland. Gilbert Roland was born Luis Antonio Damaso de Alonso on December 11, 1905, in Ciudad Juarez, Mexico. After moving to El Paso, Texas, as a boy, he discovered the stage and dreamt of Hollywood fame. Upon arriving in Los Angeles in the late 1920s, executives at Paramount Pictures worried that his full Spanish name and thick accent would limit his appeal. They rechristened him Gilbert Roland, scrubbed his biography of any Mexican references, and pressed him to speak only accented English. Roland excelled in romantic lead roles and swashbuckling adventures. His performance in The Bad One showcased his talent for silent-era drama, while films like Master of Lassitude solidified his reputation. Off-screen, he struggled with the imposed persona. He kept Spanish letters locked away and spoke English, even with fellow Mexican actors. The lie felt like a barrier between him and his heritage, and in private diary entries, Roland described missing the vibrancy of his hometown. The truth surfaced in 1942 when a Mexican newspaper published an interview celebrating Roland as a national icon. Unable to deny his roots, he addressed Hollywood in a radio broadcast, proudly declaring his Mexican birth and telling listeners he carried two homelands in my heart. Fans who once saw only a dashing stranger now embraced him as a cultural ambassador. Roland's career flourished with character roles that allowed him to draw on his heritage, from The Bad and the Beautiful to Cheyenne Autumn. His journey from concealment to cultural pride paved the way for Latino representation in mainstream cinema. Natalie Wood. Natalie Wood was born Natalia Nikolaevna Zakharenko on July 20th, 1938, in San Francisco, to Russian immigrant parents. She entered Hollywood at age 4, and studio publicity soon anglicized her name to Natalie Wood, omitting any hint of her Slavic roots. Her early roles in Miracle on 34th Street and Rebel Without a Cause portrayed her as the girl next door, an image that studios worried would clash with a foreign background. Wood dutifully learned to speak without a trace of accent, even when conversing at home. She downplayed her parents' stories of fleeing Soviet Russia, instead embracing a fabricated biography of small-town American charm. Yet as she matured into a leading lady, the disparity became stifling. In private interviews with friends, she spoke of feeling rootless and longed to reconnect with her family's past. In 1962, during a press junket in London, a journalist unearthed her birth certificate and parents' immigration records, prompting Wood to confront the truth publicly. She used the opportunity to celebrate her Russian heritage, giving interviews about ballet lessons in Soviet-style schools and the comfort of traditional Russian cooking. Audiences responded warmly. Her performances in West Side Story and Splendor in the Grass took on deeper resonance, infused with the authenticity she had long suppressed. Wood's courageous embrace of her background underscored that stardom need not require the erasure of one's origins. Edward G. Robinson. Edward G. Robinson was born Emanuel Goldenberg on December 12, 1893 in Bucharest, Romania, to a Jewish family. Emigrating to New York City at age 5, he grew up speaking Yiddish before mastering English. When he landed his first major stage roles in the early 1920s, he faced pressure to adopt a more American-sounding name. Reluctantly, he chose Edward G. Robinson, with the G a nod to his birth name. In Hollywood's golden age, Robinson became synonymous with hard-nosed gangsters. His chilling turn in Little Caesar revolutionized crime cinema. Studio publicity glossed over his immigrant past, instead touting him as a Brooklyn native who rose from humble beginnings. Robinson rarely mentioned his Romanian birthplace or Jewish upbringing in interviews, fearing anti-immigrant sentiment might hamper his career. But the facade began to crack in the late 1930s as Robinson took a public stand against fascism and anti-Semitism. He joined the Hollywood Anti-Nazi League and spoke at benefit rallies for Jewish refugees, revealing his family's background and personal convictions. The revelation surprised many fans, but it also shed new light on his performances. His empathy for underdogs and fiery moralizing in films like Key Largo resonated more deeply. Robinson's willingness to align his public life with his private beliefs earned him admiration. He continued to champion Jewish causes and immigrant rights, and his legacy transcends his on-screen toughness. By reclaiming his full identity, he demonstrated that acting can be a platform for both art and advocacy, proving that no star need hide where they come from to shine. Tony Curtis. Born Bernard Schwartz on June 3, 1925 in the Bronx, Tony Curtis was the son of Hungarian Jewish immigrants. When he signed with Universal in the late 1940s, studio executives worried that his Eastern European name and Jewish roots would limit his appeal. They rechristened him Tony Curtis, a snappier, more ambiguous moniker, and encouraged him to speak of himself as All-American in interviews. Curtis dutifully complied, leaving behind the memory of synagogue services and his family's struggles on the Lower East Side. Behind closed doors, Curtis longed to reclaim his identity. He kept only a handful of family photos in his dressing room and rarely spoke Yiddish, even with close friends. Yet his natural charm and dynamic talent shone through in early roles like City Across the River and Sweet Smell of Success. Audiences embraced his everyman appeal, unaware of the cultural tapestry he'd concealed. In 1957, Life magazine ran a profile revealing Curtis's real name and heritage. The revelation caused a minor stir. Some fans felt misled, but most admired his journey from Bronx poverty to Hollywood stardom. Curtis seized the moment to speak proudly of his parents' sacrifices and the community that shaped him. The candid admission endeared him to a new generation of viewers, and he went on to star in classics like Some Like It Hot, his versatility enriched by the authenticity he'd reclaimed. Curtis's example showed that embracing one's roots could deepen both performance and audience connection. Lauren Bacall. Born Betty Joan Persky, on September 16, 1924, in the Bronx, Lauren Bacall was the daughter of Jewish immigrant parents from what is now Belarus. Early studio head Harry Warner feared Persky sounded too ethnic, so he suggested Lauren Bacall as a stage name, an elegant, ambiguous identity that masked her heritage. Bacall agreed, and in publicity styles, she was portrayed as a Midwestern girl discovered by chance, her Eastern European roots carefully omitted. On set, she adopted an accentless, sultry voice that became her trademark in To Have and Have Not. Off-screen, Bacall distanced herself from her family's traditions. She avoided Jewish holiday gatherings and spoke of her childhood only in vague romantic terms. Yet in private letters, she confessed to friend Humphrey Bogart that she felt adrift without a firm sense of belonging. In the early 1950s, a Broadway profile dug into her background, unearthing her birth name and family story. Rather than retreat, Bacall chose honesty. In a 1952 magazine interview, she spoke warmly of her parents' resilience and the cultural richness of her upbringing. Fans responded with enthusiasm, finding her candor as captivating as her screen presence. Bacall's career flourished in films like Key Largo and How to Marry a Millionaire, her performances resonating with a newfound depth. By reclaiming her identity, Bacall proved that authenticity could coexist with Hollywood glamour. Yul Brynner. Yul Brynner was born Yuli Borisovich Brynner on July 11, 1920, in Vladivostok, Russia, to a Swiss-Russian family. After moving across Europe and studying ballet in Paris, he arrived in New York in 1941 and quickly caught Hollywood's eye. Executives feared his Slavic name and accent would confuse American audiences, so they suggested Yul Brynner, dropping the EI from his first name and anglicizing his surname. Press biographies then claimed he was born in Switzerland, glossing over any Russian ties. Brynner mastered a neutral English accent and cultivated an aura of international mystery. His exotic looks and authoritative bearing made him perfect for sweeping epics like The King and I. Off-camera, however, he quietly wrote poetry in Russian and maintained a warm correspondence with relatives abroad. His private journals reveal a man torn between the stage persona he'd built and the homeland he'd left behind. In 1957, when Life magazine ran an in-depth piece on his background, Brynner chose transparency. He appeared on television to share memories of his early life in the Russian Far East and to explain his family's wartime struggles. Audiences were fascinated. His Russian heritage added new intrigue to his portrayals of kings and leaders. Brynner's candor paid off. He won an Oscar for The King and I and remained a box office draw for decades. By embracing his origins, Brynner enriched his legacy as both a global star and a proud son of Russia. Ricardo Cortez. Ricardo Cortez, born Jacob Krantz on September 23, 1899, in New York City's Lower East Side, was the son of Jewish immigrants from Austria-Hungary. In the late 1920s, Fox Studios sought a Latin lover to rival Rudolph Valentino. Krantz fit the bill, but only if he adopted a Spanish-sounding name and fabricated a Hispanic background. Thus, Ricardo Cortez was born, billed as the dark-eyed son of a Spanish aristocrat. Cortez thrived in silent dramas like The Black Watch and in early talkies such as Alibi. Audiences believed in his faux Latino swagger. He spoke accented English and even coached himself on Spanish mannerisms. Yet off-screen, he spoke only English and spent evenings at Manhattan's Jewish community centers, far from the Iberian flair he portrayed. In 1932, a New York newspaper featured a front-page exposé revealing his true name and heritage. Expecting outrage, Cortez was surprised when fans rallied to his side, charmed by his on-screen magnetism regardless of background. He responded by granting interviews in which he recounted his immigrant upbringing from crowded tenements to early vaudeville stages. Hollywood, impressed by his honesty and box office draw, continued casting him in diverse roles: detectives, rogues, even Shakespearean characters. Cortez's career spanned 4 decades, evolving into respected character roles in films like Key Largo and Brooklyn's Finest. By transforming a manufactured persona into a platform for authenticity, Ricardo Cortez demonstrated that talent transcends origin, and that audiences ultimately embrace truth over artifice. These stories of hidden identities remind us that Hollywood's glitter often masks painful sacrifices. From stolen heritages to reclaimed pride, Each actor's journey reveals the cost of fame. If you found these revelations eye-opening, don't forget to share it with all friends and subscribe for more untold tales from Tinseltown.